This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the stuff that gets in the way of that. This episode was a special one, recorded live at our Hopen-Day, which happened right here at the studios a couple of weekends ago. You might have been here for the conversation in person. So glad if you were able to make it along, but if not, this is your opportunity to catch up on our very first live Undistracted with guest Simon Smart, the Executive Director for the Centre for Public Christianity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
So what do CPX do?
Yeah, CPX is a media company, and its goal is to promote a better understanding of the Christian faith. And so everything we do is directed to a secular audience, really. And so we're trying to promote, convey what's core to Christian faith and what that has to say to life in the 21st century. We think there's an awful lot that it has to say. And so we do that in a whole lot of different ways. We write a lot for mainstream media. We do podcasts as well. We have one called Life and Faith. And we produce books and documentaries and speaking at events, and we put on events ourselves as well.
Does it feel like a big responsibility to kind of be the representatives of the Christian viewpoint in society?
Well, we're one, aren't we? And there's plenty, but we're trying to be in places where Christian voices are sometimes rare or not always welcome, I guess. And so we're trying to be a respectful, generous presence in those places, which we think is really important to do that. And to give a kind of sense that this might be something worth having another look at. And because I feel like so many people today are estranged from the Christian story. And we're trying to be part of the conversation that's going on in public and to have a Christian perspective on that where possible.
Yeah, and I feel like we can all agree that society is changing a lot, whether it's in a social way, in it's the sort of technological shifts that we see. It's happening quite fast. What do you think a Christian voice should really be contributing to a society that is changing so rapidly in those ways?
Yes, it certainly is changing rapidly, isn't it? It's sort of bewildering speed of change in all those areas, social and technological that you mentioned. I think it's quite disorientating, actually. So I think Christianity has something to say in every area of life, so I think on this as well. Now, if you think about one thing might be that it offers something that's unchanging. And so a person who's a Christian in the 21st century in Sydney, say, shares something really important with people in London and Mumbai who are Christian and Cape Town or wherever it might be, but also they share something with someone in the 1st century or the 15th century. There's a sort of a foundational thing there that you can build a life on. I think it's a very grounding thing. And at a time where the things that we think of as foundational seem to be slipping through our hands, they're very liquid things. Christian faith offers something substantial and unmoving in a way. There's very different expressions of Christianity across the centuries and around the world, but there are core things that remain the same for the centuries, through the centuries and around the world. So that's at least one thing. I mean, there's plenty of others, but that's one for sure that I think matters today.
Yeah, it's a very comforting kind of thing to have that sort of stability. And one of the things that you've done in recent years, you wrote a book called The End of Men. I want to ask you a little bit about this, but first of all, explain what brought you to write The End of Men.
Yeah, lots of people looked at me, worried when I said I was writing on this topic because it's a very controversial topic. It's often a very negative topic, this question of masculinity today. And so, we have this series of books called the Rethinking series, and so when it came my turn I thought, no, I want to do this, and part of it was because of very personal reasons, in the sense that I feel like I'd experienced two vividly contrasting all-male environments, one that I think was very, very healthy and wholesome, and one that really wasn't. And so I have this real interest in the subject of how we can find ways to create environments where our young men will grow up to be the kind of people you'd want to be around if you were a child or a teenager or a woman or another man. And so I have great confidence that we can do that well, but I think it takes some work and some attention.
Yeah,
and I think there are real challenges today for men. So I wanted to jump in and say something hopefully positive and helpful.
Well, it's a very topical thing, and if you're thinking about what does the Christian voice look like in different parts of society, what can it contribute to different conversations, this is definitely an important one. And as we said a moment ago, you know, society is shifting in so many ways, socially, technologically as well. Are some of those changes, how do you think those changes are affecting that shifting role of men and male identity?
Yeah, I think it is. I think those changes are absolutely affecting the way in which people perceive men, the way men perceive themselves, and that's for sure. So there's some confusion around this now for men about what you're meant to be. And what I think is the case is we've got an overlap between one era and another. So we still have present through media and literature and film and so on a traditional masculinity, that sort of picture of the sort of independent, maybe slightly aggressive, emotionally detached, risk-taking male, and that's what you're meant to be. At the same time, society has come to value things like emotional intelligence and social interaction and things that were typically thought of as not male. And so I think what you've got is this sort of overlap in this evolution of who we are as men and women. And for a lot of young fellas today, it's a confusing picture.
So when you had a really healthy environment, you said that represented masculinity in a healthy way, and one that wasn't so much. What was the difference between the two?
One was a very narrow picture of what it is to be a man, and it was kind of aggressive, brutal in dealing with difference, not accepting the breadth of what we can be as fully human beings, this sort of stuff. It was pretty tough.
Is this boarding school are we talking about?
Yeah. and another was, again, years ago I was a teacher, but I was working in another environment where I think there was a difference. It was an imperfect, right? It's not a perfect environment, but it was a marked difference in the sense of celebrating all kinds of different ways in which you can be male, and also celebrating every aspect of life, so music and sport and academic study and drama and art and all the richness of life. And I think sometimes I'd say Australia particularly, we have had a more narrow picture of what men are meant to be and what they're meant to look for. And so I was trying to sort of have this more expansive view of who we're meant to be as men. But there was one thing that I did sort of settle on as key, and it is very much influenced by my Christian faith too.
Mm-hmm. What was that? I feel like you teased us with that one. What was the key that you realised?
Well, what I decided was two things I'd say were key here. Was one of the key aspects of this book was to say that young men won't just simply know how to be good men, they have to be shown. And so there's a big emphasis, and I'm not alone in this, but a big emphasis on mentorship and modelling of the right kinds of things. And so I got to a point though where I thought, and this is a book for everyone, it's not just for Christians, but I thought, no, I need to hold up Jesus as a model of masculinity that, irrespective of your theological commitments, that you could say, yes, that's someone worth examining. That's a life worth examining. What was he like as a man? He was against a backdrop that was incredibly patriarchal, was incredibly brutal when it came to imposition of power over weakness. He comes in and sort of upends everything. And so what he's saying that I'm full humanity, and guess what? This is what it looks like. It doesn't look like imposing power over other people, even though you might be able to do that. It looks like washing the feet of the people around you, right? So you become a servant of other people. That's true greatness according to Jesus. He's also emotionally engaged, not detached. Like he's not the Marlboro man out on the plains, right? Where there's this sort of full engagement with people. And you look at the way he engages with children, right? Really interesting in that culture. With women, radical in the way he treated women as fully human beings. The way he treated enemies was interesting too. He wasn't afraid of a kind of a battle. Like he put himself in positions where he knew he'd find challenge, but he refused violence. He engaged with enemies with a kind of determination, clarity, good thinking, but a kind of loving embrace, and an embrace of people who are on the edges. So there's compassion. These are all qualities that I think are sort of restrained strength. These are qualities that we'd look for in developing young men. And I just thought that's a very, very compelling model.
Yes,
that
definitely.
we can hold up.
And it puts kind of Christianity in the centre of some of the solution, I suppose, for some of the identity struggles that men and women may be facing. But
yes.
In terms of Christianity's role and place in helping people who may be struggling with identity, who may be sort of asking questions of that who am I kind of nature, what kind of solution, what kind of help, I suppose, does Christianity offer to those questions?
A lot, I think, Laura. I think one of the things that I'd say to that is that for a very long time now as a culture, we've been focused on individual freedom. So this sort of emphasis on, and we've come to think of individual freedom as meaning endless choice, which I don't think has been very helpful actually. But we've had this sense of you've got to establish your identity yourself. It's all about self-creation. I'll be the author of my destiny and all that sort of stuff. You've been told from a very young age you can be anything you want to be, and it puts it all on you, actually. So in terms of forming identity, it's a really important question for all of us, but I think you end up coming up short if you've got to dredge it up from inside you all the time. I think and there's a lot of research in this too, that where people can find their identity in something outside of themselves, in a bigger story than themselves, that's a more easy to establish identity. It's sort of it's not as slippery. It's able to be established on firmer ground. And this idea, Christianity is all about entering into a massive story, biggest story ever told, actually, and where every person finds a role and a place. And so, in my mind, that offers a very enticing thing for people who are trying to establish identity. And it's worth asking whether or not the last few hundred years of emphasis on this sort of individual, and there's some good parts to this too, but it's sort of like where does it end, and where do we find true identity in community and in a story bigger than ourselves? I think that's where Christianity has a huge amount to offer people today who are honestly really struggling with that question that you've raised.
Yeah, so where do you see society going if we don't address that question of identity, if we don't find some kind of solid base for who we are? Where does society go if we don't address that well?
Yeah, I think if we don't address it well, people end up in very atomised situations without a stable thing on which to kind of rest their identity. And I would say that it's important to say that I think Christian communities have a lot to offer in this, actually. So if you think about, even though, religion's been sort of pushed to the margins in lots of ways in countries like Australia and lots of Western countries. If you look around you and think, right, what are people finding now? Where are they struggling? There's huge examples of this where, for instance, we're in a loneliness epidemic. Huge numbers of people are lonely. They're acknowledging this in surveys and so on, and young people especially are in this situation. Well, Christianity can offer community at its best. It's not always at its best, but at its best, Christian communities can offer a great welcome to people, and communities of people, of all ages and stages and different sort of socioeconomic status, if you like, and education, whatever, and brings them into this community and says you all got to love each other. And there's huge benefits in that, I would say. Anxiety and depression's a huge thing today. Lots of people struggling with this. And again, Christian faith doesn't solve that, or doesn't protect people from that. Plenty of Christians, of course, suffer from anxiety and depression, and I know plenty of people like that. But there's lots of evidence to show that when you're belonging to a community of people, this can be an enormous help in helping you to avoid it or recover quicker from these kind of challenges. And so that's another thing that I think people can offer. And again, huge hospitality to people who need more than a kind of chat bot with which to engage with.
The robots don't give us community?
Real community, I'm talking about, embodied community. And perhaps we'll talk a bit more about that. But I think that's another area that we can talk about as something to add.
Yeah, and I mean, you're hearing these really great solutions, these really great things that Christianity can offer, but if the world is becoming more intolerant towards religion, I'm sure many of us have seen ways where that's been the case, how can we offer solution when we have the potential to be totally dismissed as a source for solution to come from.
Yeah, sure, that might be the case, and in certain circles and whatever. Well, one is just to keep turning up and serving in the ways that at its best Christian communities do. So they're called to this. We're called to have an outward focus, to look after people who are in need. And Christians have done this brilliantly over many centuries. So, yes, there can be opposition. I mean, that's not new. And often Christians have done really, really well in those sorts of situations. So one thing that I think is helpful, a colleague of mine is really good at articulating this, but it's to rather than look at that sort of opposition and see hostility, look at need. People are needing this story, in my estimations. And so there's lots of ways that by turning up, being part of communities, serving them in radical ways. At its best, Christians have done this brilliantly, where they'll get out and serve communities in ways that no one's expecting. And people will hear that then, right? Very few people will object to being helped. Yeah. And so where there's need, and if we see that, and that's what we're looking for, rather than being super sensitive to the opposition. And often hostility comes from real experiences or misunderstandings. One of the things at the Centre for Public Christianity that we're trying to do is to sort of overcome misunderstandings about what's central to Christian faith. Because there's a lot out there, and engage with those too. So, yeah, there can be opposition, but there's an enormous amount you can do to kind of help diffuse that, I would say.
Yeah, and it sounds like the human side, that relational side of what we do as Christians, becomes increasingly important, the face-to-face time. Important. So on that note then, how do you think artificial intelligence, the many different platforms that we're kind of engaging through the use of AI, how does that affect the way we engage with faith? Can we get a good answer about what our faith could be like if we ask ChatGPT?
Yes, and I might not be the best person to ask about this, because I'm very worried about this. I'm not a big fan, I have to say. Okay. Now, there are definitely things that AI can do that will be helpful. So, for instance, in areas like Bible translation, there's potentially some great work that can go on there. Things like answering questions, apologetic type questions can be useful too. Bible concordance. There's ways that the speed of this is incredible, right? It's amazing stuff. I've got to think about the net benefit though, and that's where I worry. And even in this area where you're talking about with kind of theological kind of benefit, there's risks in the back end, isn't there, of cultural or theological biases. I think there's risk too of the AI going a bit off track and putting out stuff that is actually psychologically or theologically harmful. So I worry about that. I worry more broadly about sort of mental acuity and concentration and us being able to think. And so I think that's another area. And the other thing, and this is a sort of theological slant on it as well, I'm really conscious of the fact that Christianity is a very, very physical faith. It's about physicality. It's about embodied existence. God becomes a human being, incarnational faith, right? And all the while in sort of contemporary life, we seem to be disappearing from our bodies into this sort of virtual world. And so it's almost like, Christ is coming down to earth while we're sort of disappearing into this sort of virtual kind of
He's gone into a computer
world. That's right. And so I think that's something for Christians to think carefully about, that we have a faith that's all about physicality. Even at the point of resurrection, it's resurrected bodies, right? Not just spirits. And so there's this reality that I think says a lot to us about how we might be a bit cautious about rushing too quickly into that sort of AI brave new world.
That brave new world. Well, Simon, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you join us. This is the inaugural live Undistracted recording. Great. So thank you so much for being part of that.
Thanks, Laura. It's great chatting to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Undistracted. Hoping to have many more live experiences for us all to get along to. But in the meantime, you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.